Hello again, my Agile Air Raiders. On this video I wanted to talk a little bit about a strategy that was pretty cool in EDF 4 and has made it over to EDF 5, but it's a little bit different this time around. And that would be for Air Raider. One of Air Raider's weaknesses, of course, is his lack of mobility. However, he does have vehicles to counter that. So, in certain missions in EDF 4, which you could do, which was a very useful tactic, was to take a tank, which was his fastest tank in EDF 4 was very fast. So what you would do is you would take that tank as one of your vehicles, and then you would take a strafe plan, because strafe plan was so strong in EDF 4. The reason being was the enemies would actually follow the planes that dropped the strafe plan, so therefore when you threw the strafe plan at the enemies, the planes flying away from the enemies or over their heads, the enemies would turn around and actually follow them. So it kind of like pushed the enemies away from you. So as you were driving around the map, usually you would drive around the edge of the map, and you would just pop out of your tank and throw a strafe plan down, and then get back in and keep driving, and then you would throw a tank out when you had one, and then you can come back around for that tank later when you needed, if you like, say if your tank lost some health. Of course, you could also drop other things out of the tank. You could throw, you know, whether it be these mortars, or you could throw turret guns or whatever. But strafe plan was usually the most prominent thing because of his being so strong. The tanks have made it back in EDF 5. However, there is a big difference. They're still fast. There actually is a railgun now and a tank that are pretty fast, but they actually pale in comparison to using the Vigaltas. The Vigaltas are very fast this time, as far as at least the ones that are the fire Vigaltas. Anything that has the two fire the red one, the red Vigalta with the two flamethrowers, and then of course ultimately the DLC 2 Vigalta, which is level 112, which is extremely fast. Actually, it's faster than the fire Vigaltas, which is kind of crazy. So you could take either or. I mean, obviously, if you have the DLC one, then you want to take that one, but the fire ones are just as good. So it would be level 80, I believe, is the fire one. Usually the way I can tell which ones are the flamethrower ones are the ones that have the two 3000 ammo guns for the two top guns, because that's usually the flamethrower ammo, and then the other two guns are usually shotguns. So you can take a Vigalta now, and then you can also take strafe plan. Strafe plan is still good in this game. It's not as good because the enemies don't follow the airplanes for the drop the strafe anymore. However, you can still take strafe plans, and also he has some options in his strafe plans now. Like for example, this level 86 one. Like say you're going forward, so you're running away from the enemies with your back to the enemies. This strafe is nice because it drops in front of you and behind you, so you can drop it right at your feet. You don't have to turn around, and then you can drop it and then get back in the Vigalta and run away. And by the time the enemies get to you, they'll actually be right in the center of the strafe plan. Whereas, say for example, this strafe plan up here, the X5, you would have to be jumping backwards, so that when you jump out of your Vigalta, it'll be facing forward when you drop it, so it hit the enemies. So just something to keep in mind. But and then ultimately, one of the best air raids, the level 88 Phobos bombing plan. I would say it's actually better than the strafe plan this time around, if you're not having to worry about your friends and getting caught in the blast, because it does such a concentrated damage in one area. Because whereas the strafe plans are more spread out in a long range, so it's going to miss some enemies, whereas the bombing plan is pretty short, and it's of course explosive, so it's going to hit a lot of enemies and do a lot of damage, and it's very cheap to call out as well. So you take one of those, and then you would go out into the field, which I'll show here, and you can drive around and stay very mobile, and just drop bombing plans or turret guns out of your vehicle when you have some free time, or if it's a safe area. So let's go ahead and get into some video here and show it on one of the missions here really quickly. Alright, on this first video clip, I'm going to be using the DLC pack Vigalta, and also I have the Phobos bombing plan, strafe plan, and then Z lasers. Of course, like I said, you don't need the DLC Vigalta, but if you have access to it, it is pretty nice. One negative to the Vigalta that's DLC is it costs more points than the Fire Vigalta. So it might actually be better to take the Fire Vigalta if it's fast enough for the mission, which usually it is. I mean, it's like I said, it's pretty fast, but just the DLC one is just extremely fast. So, like I said, it's a little bit trouble for me to call it out here at the beginning. I have to get a decent amount of kills, but it's good on missions like this where there's like a lot of swarming enemies. So, and like I said, you can either go forward, jump forward around the map, or you can jump backwards so that when you jump out, you can just be facing the right direction for your bombing plan. But it is a little more tricky, of course, to jump backwards around the map. But usually it's easy to go around the perimeter of the map because there's usually major streets around the outside of the map, so it's easier to avoid obstacles. But even so, though, with these Vigaltas, what you can do is you can, while you're jumping in the air, you can use the boost mid-air to like turn around as you want to turn a corner, or you can use the boost to stop yourself a little bit if you're going too fast. So they have a lot of control, which is nice now, at least the fast ones. So they're definitely fun to use. Okay, so I finally have the vehicle to call in here, and it's a good time because they're about to drop a bunch of enemies here. And then I'm just going to go forward around the edge of the map here. And as you'll see, this thing is just ridiculously fast. It's probably the fastest. I would say it feels faster than the helicopter maybe, but I'm not sure on that. But it's definitely faster than the tanks. As you can see, it's a huge jump. And then once you get to the corner, you can just use the boost to turn around a little bit. It can be a little tough sometimes to turn, but of course the invisible wall on the edge of the map will always stop you regardless. But one thing I noticed though when you're jumping around with the Vigaltas is sometimes you'll stumble on fences or on like broken down building foundations, so that's something you have to be careful with. But I can always jump out and either throw my strafe plan, which like I said throws in front of me and behind me, so I don't have to worry about turning around, or I can turn around, throw the bombing plan, or I can turn around and throw the lasers, the laser turrets, and those do a lot of work, and then just get back in and then just continue around. This thing even turns on its feet sideways really fast too, so if you have time you don't even need to like jump up and boost. You can just turn around. Like there you can see it can stumble a little bit on those fences sometimes. But you can pretty much control yourself in the air pretty well with this. So, and also it's very strong, so once you get to the end of the all the enemies dying, there's just a few left, you can always finish off like the colonists or cosmonauts with the actual gun itself. But these Z lasers are very, very strong. I've been really enjoying them. They do cut through crowds and they do a lot of damage, so this can also work on missions with, you know, wasps and tadpoles as well, but of course they can actually keep up with you and actually hit you, so you have to be careful with that. But if you're dropping a strafe plan, like that particular strafe plan, like, you know, once you land on the ground, you just drop the strafe plan really quickly, it'll kill a lot of those tadpoles and wasps that are following you anyway. And you do have 90,000 health, so pretty good. Like right here, you can kind of stumble on some of those fences if you're not careful, so that's something to definitely be careful with. But now all the NPCs are dead, so they're definitely following me now, so I can do a lot of work here now with the bombing plan. And then I have another vehicle, so I can just throw this vehicle here, and then if I need another vehicle, it'll be there for when I come back around and get another one. One thing I noticed was the colonists and cosmonauts don't seem to attack your Vigaltas or your vehicles until someone enters that vehicle and gets out of it. And once you enter and get out, it seems like the NPCs view, at least the colonists and cosmonauts, not the spiders or ants, but they'll seem to recognize it as an NPC enemy, and they'll start attacking your vehicle now. But it seems like if you don't enter it, they won't stop and attack it. Typically, it seems like. So that's something that's kind of interesting. But now there's just a few enemies left. This is, I think, the last wave anyway. So you can just finish them off with the laser turrets, and then I'll have to go in and actually kill the colonists themselves with the Vigalta. This machine gun actually does get affected by range, which is interesting on this Vegalta, but it's still very, very strong, and usually you're going to be fighting relatively closely with it anyway, so... But at far range it's very weak. Alright, one more phase here, probably a bombing, and then that'll be it. I've done this particular tactic on quite a few missions as well, especially if you don't have someone that can be like the person that distracts. Like if you don't have a fencer or a wing diver, you can always use Air Raider to be the distraction. However, with Air Raider or with Rangers sprinting now, he actually can be a good distraction with as long as there's buildings. In the mission, you can always run around and stall them through buildings with the max sprint at 200%. So he's actually pretty good. It's like all characters now have options to be the one that can distract if they need to be. But Air Raider definitely is probably the most damaging ones of that because of just the bombing plans that he has access to. I'm not sure why I'm running away from these last 4 enemies at this point. I can turn around, but I'm just heading to get my other vehicles, what I'm doing here first. But yeah, I think that it's like 7,000-ish for this Vegalta compared to the 5,000 points it costs for the Fire Vegalta, so you don't get these quite as often, but this thing is definitely probably a better fighting vehicle, probably, because you don't have to worry about the short-range flamethrowers, for one, and the shotguns don't have very many shots on them. But those shotguns are pretty good, especially for wasps and drones and so forth. But yeah, the next thing I'm going to take out is a railgun, and the thing with those is you actually can drive backwards with those, relatively simple. What you can do is you can face backwards and then face your gun forward, or face your gun to the rear of your vehicle, and then as you're driving, left is left and right is right. It's just you have to hold back instead of forward, so that's kind of interesting. So it's not too difficult to drive backwards, so that when you hop out of your vehicle really quickly, you'll be facing towards the enemies that are chasing you, and it's a lot easier just to throw a bombing plan out, because that's probably your best air raid. Alright, last guy here, and then we're going to do the tank. I think I like the railgun better than the tank, honestly, but and I guess it depends on what you're using it for, the vehicle. But yeah, the railgun has more health, though. That is one benefit of the railgun over the tank if you're using that strategy. Alright, so this is the tank one now. I'm throwing the tank out and grabbing that. Or the railgun, rather. I'm doing the railgun first. And I have the same air raids. And you actually can throw your laser turrets on your tank as well, on top of it if you want. Or you can always, like what I've done in the past in the other game, is I've put like defense posts on my vehicle if I needed to be a little more survivable. But as you can see, it's substantially slower. So it feels like 50% slower, but I don't know exactly. But you can still get away from the enemy relatively, for the most part, and it still can be used. And then this is like the strafe plan where you can just throw it at your feet, doesn't matter what direction you're facing. The tanks like to slide a lot too, which is strange. But of course you can also drive backwards here, as I said before. And if you drive this direction and then face forward with your gun, like I said, left will be left and right will be right. And you can use that to hold backwards the whole time. So it's a little difficult to get used to, but I'm gotten better at driving backwards with the tanks, just from EDF 4 and all the practice. Yeah, there's no enemies there, but I was just showing that if you back out there, you can quickly drop the bombing plan, and then that's it. And now here's the last thing: is the air raid, or is the tank. Now I have this time, and this is where I'm going to aim backwards here, and then like I said, it's pretty easy to steer that way if you do it that way, because you don't necessarily need to use your cannon much on your actual tank. You can use your air raid for the most part. But yeah, it's pretty useful. But yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to share with you on this one. I'd say this is a pretty good strategy. You can also use a helicopter as well, but I'll have to use a different video to cover that. But because you can throw air raids in the helicopter, as I mentioned in a previous video. But I would say this is definitely more easy to pick up, and probably easier to stay alive with, especially with the Vegalta, because it's a very useful vehicle. I would say Vegalta this time around is probably the most useful vehicle in the game, just from the obscene amount of health you get on it now, and just because of how practical they are with their weapons. So, pretty nice. But yeah, that's all I wanted to have for you in this one. Just a quick little tip that I think is pretty useful. So that'll be it. So once again, thanks a lot for watching, and remember, EDF doesn't leave a man behind, ever. And also, if you'd like to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing, as it does make a big difference. Thanks.